Have you ever wondered why so many young women today are drawn to men who have already lived a few more seasons of life? Not because of the luxury, not always because of the security, but because in a world built on chaos, he carries something she cannot find among her peers: gravity. Most men her age are fluent in distraction. They chase dopamine in digital form, mistaking attention for affection and approval for intimacy. But the older man, he walks slower, speaks less, and looks at her in a way that doesn't demand. He carries the calm of someone who has already fought his inner wars. And for a generation, drowning in constant noise, that calm feels like oxygen. The Gen Z woman has grown up under the fluorescent light of overstimulation, every emotion amplified, every desire accelerated. She has learned to perform confidence while secretly starving for safety. The older man, meanwhile, has learned what it costs to maintain peace. And peace, to a restless generation, feels like power. When she meets him, something ancient awakens. Not attraction in the shallow sense, but recognition, a subconscious memory of balance. Her feminine nature, chaotic and fluid like water, senses his grounded stillness, like a river meeting its bank. And though she might resist, call it cliché, even mock it online, her nervous system tells another truth. In his presence, she exhales. In Jungian terms, she projects the archetype of the wise father onto him. Not because she seeks to be parented, but because she seeks initiation. The father archetype represents order, direction, and meaning, everything the modern world dismantled in pursuit of freedom. And freedom without form becomes chaos. So she reaches for the man who carries the weight she's been taught to reject, but secretly longs to feel again. This isn't about money. It's about maturity, not about dominance, but direction. She doesn't crave control. She craves coherence, the kind that cannot be faked through aesthetics or age. The older man, when aligned, is not merely older in years. He is older in awareness. He has already bled in places her generation still fears to touch. He has buried illusions, outgrown vanity, and faced himself in silence. And when he speaks, it is not to impress, but to affirm the stillness within her that modernity has silenced. Stoic philosophy teaches that attraction without virtue is volatility. Epictetus would say, "You cannot desire what is truly good until you understand what is truly within your control." The Gen Z woman, shaped by a culture of constant validation, encounters a paradox in the older man, someone who does not seek her approval. And that very indifference ignites her fascination. Because indifference, when born of self-mastery, not arrogance, becomes magnetic. He doesn't chase her, he observes her. He doesn't flatter, he mirrors. And in that mirror, she confronts her own craving for validation, the hunger that social media could never feed. It's not that she wants his age, she wants his energy. An energy that says, "I know who I am," even when you look away. In a generation raised on external mirrors, such internal solidity feels like a miracle. Psychologically, this dynamic reveals a shift. Younger women, raised amidst uncertainty and fragmented masculinity, have begun to romanticize emotional steadiness as the ultimate form of power. The older man becomes a symbol, not of control, but of containment. He is not the storm, but the harbor. And yet, this attraction also hides a shadow. For some, it becomes dependency, mistaking his experience for her identity. The same calm that soothes her can also consume her if she loses her sense of self within it. Jung warned of this projection, that when we seek completion in another, we abandon the task of becoming whole ourselves. Still, beneath the surface, something deeper unfolds. The young woman's soul is not seeking an older man, but the maturity he symbolizes. She is chasing integration, the union between her chaos and her calm, her passion and her patience. The older man simply becomes the mirror through which she begins to see what emotional sovereignty looks like. For him, too, there is an awakening. The older man who has walked through disillusionment recognizes in her the vitality he once buried under discipline. She reminds him that wisdom without warmth becomes sterile, and control without connection becomes isolation. She becomes, in his inner mythology, the anima, the feminine energy that stirs the sleeping heart of the disciplined mind. So they meet, not as generations colliding, but as energies completing a circuit, one grounded, one electric, one tired of noise, the other terrified of silence, and somewhere between them, balance flickers into being, fragile, fleeting, yet profoundly human. Over time, the bond between the older man and the Gen Z woman becomes less about romance and more about reflection. Each sees in the other a missing polarity that modern life has muted. She, the seeker of sensation, finds stillness. He, the keeper of stillness, finds sensation. Yet their connection is not meant to complete them, only to awaken them to what already exists within. The Stoics spoke often about temperance, the art of balance. Marcus Aurelius wrote that everything harmonizes with me, which is harmonious to you, O universe. In that sense, their meeting is not an accident, but a mirror of nature's rhythm. Young and old, movement and rest, desire and restraint. The woman's youth is not ignorance, it is raw energy, unrefined potential. The man's age is not decay, it is distilled awareness. Together, they embody the full spectrum of becoming. But beneath the poetry lies psychology. Many Gen Z women are raised in an era where masculine guidance is often fragmented, fathers absent, partners uncertain, culture unanchored. So, when they meet a man who radiates certainty without aggression, patience without passivity, their psyche interprets it as home. Her nervous system relaxes not because he is older, but because his presence signals safety. In trauma psychology, this is called co-regulation, one nervous system soothing another by rhythm, tone, and energy. The calm heartbeat becomes contagious, yet the danger is subtle. When safety becomes salvation, the line between admiration and attachment blurs. The young woman may unconsciously surrender her authority, mistaking his wisdom for her worth. This is the Jungian anima-animus tension, the feminine yielding to the masculine, not out of love, but out of longing for inner structure. And if she does not awaken to it, she may begin to orbit his world instead of building her own. The older man, too, stands at a crossroads. In her vitality, he sees youth reborn, the wild pulse he once restrained in pursuit of purpose. She reminds him of what he sacrificed to build his composure: spontaneity, curiosity, risk. But if he is unconscious, he may mistake her admiration for validation, using her energy to postpone his own encounter with aging. Thus, both can fall into illusion. She seeking identity, he seeking immortality. The Stoic would warn against both extremes. Seneca taught that attachment to youth or beauty is the seed of suffering because it binds the mind to what time will inevitably change. True wisdom, he wrote, is not to possess, but to perceive without clinging. The mature man, therefore, must love her not as a possession, but as a reflection, an echo of the life force he must now cultivate inwardly. The young woman must learn to see in him not a savior, but a standard, proof that serenity is possible after storms. When they meet in awareness, something sacred happens. Mentorship turns into mutual evolution. She begins to mirror his steadiness, while he learns to soften his edges. Her laughter becomes the sound of his redemption. His silence becomes the rhythm of her growth. Together, they create a third energy, neither youth nor age, but presence. And presence is timeless. From the outside, the world misunderstands. It sees only numbers, decades, and judgments. It mocks what it cannot measure. But those who have walked through loneliness know that emotional age outweighs chronology. What binds souls is not birth year, but depth, the shared capacity to sit in silence without needing to fill it. In truth, the phenomenon of Gen Z women drawn to older men is less about preference and more about hunger. Hunger for anchored masculinity, for relational clarity, for emotional safety that modern dating apps cannot simulate. It is a quiet rebellion against the culture of instant gratification. In choosing depth over novelty, she unconsciously honors the Stoic ideal, to seek what endures over what excites. And perhaps this is where both finally meet, not as teacher and student, but as travelers. He realizes that wisdom without wonder calcifies into pride. She realizes that curiosity without direction dissolves into chaos. Between them, equilibrium breathes, a reminder that masculine and feminine, young and old, are not opposites, but oscillations of the same eternal current. In every generation, there comes a quiet fatigue, a moment when youth begins to question its own reflection. Gen Z is that generation. Raised in an age of boundless choice, they now crave boundaries. Surrounded by constant expression, they now long for silence. And in that silence, the figure of the older man appears, not as an idol, but as a contrast. He represents a rhythm slower than the algorithm. He answers texts with punctuation and pauses before he speaks. To a generation that equates speed with relevance, his stillness feels subversive. The older man is not chasing the next trend. He has already watched a dozen rise and fade. His attention, scarce, deliberate, earned, carries the weight of something holy in a world that treats attention like currency. To the Gen Z woman, this difference feels magnetic. She has grown up surrounded by men, fluent in irony, but illiterate in depth. They know how to signal virtue, but not how to hold space. They are boys of fragmented identity, performing masculinity through aesthetics, confidence through captions, and dominance through detachment. She, meanwhile, is exhausted from decoding endless performances. When she meets an older man who speaks plainly, who does not need to be seen to feel significant, her nervous system recognizes authenticity. Psychologically, this attraction mirrors the animus integration Jung described, the feminine seeking to unite with her inner masculine principle, which represents direction, focus, and order. The older man, already tempered by experience, becomes the living symbol of that principle. His composure is not decoration, it is discipline made visible, and she, intuitively, is drawn to it not because she wants to be contained, but because she longs to remember what structure feels like. He, on the other hand, encounters her as both temptation and teacher. Her energy reignites what he once buried beneath responsibility, the forgotten language of spontaneity. She laughs without calculation. She feels without defense. Her presence reminds him that control, when rigid, suffocates the soul. In her, he rediscovers the art of wonder. In him, she learns the art of restraint. It is not domination that binds them, but polarity. Stoicism teaches that human relationships are not possessions, but exercises in perception. To love rightly, one must see without clinging, to admire without consuming. The older man, if truly Stoic, understands this. He does not own her curiosity, he earns it through presence. His calm is not indifference but mastery. He has learned, often painfully, that passion without peace destroys both. And so he loves with boundaries, a love that does not collapse under intensity, but expands through awareness. For the Gen Z woman, this dynamic challenges her conditioning. The culture has taught her to chase excitement, to measure love by stimulation, and to equate attention with care. Yet the older man does not feed her constant hunger for affirmation. His silence feels unsettling at first, until she realizes it is not neglect, but containment. He listens more than he speaks, because he understands the power of unspoken energy. In his presence, she begins to see that maturity is not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. Still, this relationship, archetypal as it may be, carries tests. When shadow meets shadow, illusions fracture. She must confront her desire to be rescued from her own uncertainty. He must confront his tendency to hide behind wisdom as armor. The age gap, when stripped of romance, becomes a mirror for both. She sees the woman she is becoming. He sees the man he still must become. And somewhere between their reflections, something beautiful unfolds. Not dependency, but transformation. She begins to carry herself with the same grounded energy that once drew her in. Her emotions, once turbulent, find rhythm. His mind, once too quiet, learns to dance again. What began as attraction becomes initiation. Perhaps this is what the Stoics meant by living in accordance with nature. Not suppressing desire, but purifying it, refining the raw instinct into virtue. Their connection, when conscious, becomes less about romance and more about balance. It teaches both that love, at its highest form, is not a transaction of need, but a transmission of awareness. In the end, it is not about youth or age. It is about one truth meeting another. One burning to learn peace, the other learning to feel again. Together, they discover that wisdom and vitality are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin, one carved by experience, the other illuminated by curiosity. Eventually, what begins as fascination matures into revelation. The Gen Z woman who once sought safety in the older man starts to realize that what she admired was never his age, but his presence. The serenity she felt in him begins to awaken within herself. That shift is the quiet birth of sovereignty, the moment she stops seeking to be led and begins leading her own spirit. The relationship becomes alchemical. The fire of youth tempers the metal of experience. The coolness of age refines the heat of passion. Both are transformed. She learns that wisdom is not passive, and he learns that control is not strength. Together, they walk the thin line between chaos and order, between eros and logos, until each learns to stand alone without losing connection. In the modern world, where loneliness is disguised as independence, this dynamic forces an uncomfortable truth to surface. Emotional maturity has become the new luxury. It cannot be filtered, bought, or feigned. The older man's calm presence is not a trick. It is the residue of his suffering. The young woman senses this instinctively, that peace is not inherited, it is earned. And what she truly desires is not his story, but the discipline that shaped it. He, in turn, sees that her attraction is both a gift and a test. Her youth does not flatter his ego, it exposes it. If he is not conscious, Her admiration becomes his escape from time, a way to pretend that he is still at the center of the world. But if he is wise, he recognizes her as a mirror, reflecting the vitality he once abandoned. He does not try to own it. He learns to honor it without attachment. That too is Stoicism. To love without clinging, to enjoy without fearing loss. In Jungian depth, this dance is not merely romantic, it is archetypal. The young woman's psyche seeks integration of the masculine principle within herself. She is not falling for the man, but for what he represents: containment, direction, purpose. The older man, on the other hand, seeks to reunite with his inner feminine, the softness, receptivity, and wonder that life's burdens once hardened. They are each other's mirror, not each other's destiny. Still, the world misunderstands this alchemy. It labels, mocks, moralizes, unable to see that beneath the surface lies something deeply psychological. The age gap is not rebellion, it is resonance. Two souls meeting at different points on the spiral of growth, exchanging energy where both are incomplete. Yet, no matter how deep the connection, it must eventually transcend dependency. And so, the true test begins. Can she take what she's learned from him, his patience, his steadiness, his discernment, and apply it to her own becoming? Can he, in turn, absorb her vitality without consuming it, letting her remind him that life still expands forward, not backward? If both can do this, their meeting fulfills its higher purpose. The Stoics would call this sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things. Every encounter, every bond, exists not for possession, but for purification. Each person is both teacher and lesson. When she realizes that his calm was never meant to contain her, but to awaken her own, she no longer seeks him as a savior. She becomes what she admired. Her energy steadies, her choices sharpen, and she begins to radiate the same gravity that once drew her to him. He watches her transformation with quiet pride, not the pride of ownership, but of release. For in teaching her peace, he too remembers its cost. Her laughter softens his solitude. Her clarity humbles his control. Together they dissolve the illusion of time, showing that wisdom and wonder are not stages of life, but states of soul. And then, inevitably, they part, not in bitterness, but in understanding. Because every true connection must eventually return to silence. She walks away more whole, less afraid of her own depths. He remains more alive, less afraid of his own softness. The circle closes not with regret, but with reverence. For in truth, she was never drawn to his age. She was drawn to the man who had learned to hold still in a world that never stops moving. And he was never drawn to her youth. He was drawn to the reminder that life, no matter how wise, must still feel. The lesson, timeless and stoic, settles like dawn after a long night. Love's highest form is not possession, but elevation.